All right, so welcome everyone to this next event and roundtable discussion on platform competition and the impact of different database business models organized by the Digital Markets Competition Forum initiative here at Copenhagen Business School. So today's discussion will be focusing on two broad questions. The first is on how do platforms and their business users as well leverage the data to engage customers. The second question is on how do free, which are basically ads-based, and paid subscription-based business models differ, and what are the implications for platform competition and data regulation more generally. So platforms, as we know, have proved to be an invaluable organizer of data and information flow, which has benefited a large number of firms, particularly small firms, which can leverage this data to reach out to the new customers on one hand, or even to create new products and services. And this creates additional benefits for users, for us, that we use in all these platform services. However, two concerns are mounting around the use of data, particularly in the platform context and the digital economy more broadly. So first, as the platform grows large and processes greater data from users, the concern is again that it can gain a data advantage and make it harder for others to compete a la pair. The second issue is that there is a concern with possible exploitations of consumer data, although this is still not articulated properly, but it's particularly, the concern is for firms leveraging ads-based free services. And here the issue at hand is that these services are primarily a sort of Trojan horse to collect user data, or so is the belief. And because the primary economic interest might be to serve the advertisers, so the concern is that consumers will eventually receive service of lower quality or have their data misused. So to delve into these issues and revisit some of these assumptions and go to the details of the core of the problem, following what is by now a standard format by the MC Forum, we have brought together a distinguished panel of academic experts on one hand who have done work on some of these issues, and also representatives from the corporate world. So let me introduce the speakers of the panel today. So we have first my dear colleague, professor of the digitalizations at CBS, Ioanna Constantiou, who has done extensive work on digitalizations and how firms use data to create value. We have also Jan Kramer, professor of information systems at the University of Passau, who has done some interesting work on the online advertising ecosystems and the role, of course, that data play into this. Alexandre Destril, professor of European law at University of Namur, a well-known academic figure to those interested in competition law, who has written extensively on the different policy options for the digital markets in particular. Yorgos Petropoulos, research fellow at MIT, who has done work and is also doing current work with non-colleagues and friends of the DMC forums, such as Marsha Fullenstein and Jeffrey Parker, on the role of data and competitive implications, but also on the regulatory remedies. And I think we'll discuss, some of this later. And on our corporate side, we have Morgan Taylor, general manager at SACT, the App Association, who will bring the perspective of the SME companies that are using the platform services and therefore are using the data for their own services. And finally, but not least, Ben Savage, software engineer at Facebook, who will explain us the working on Facebook algorithm. So thank you all for joining the panel. It's a great pleasure to moderate this terrific discussion on the role of data. And I will actually start with Ben, asking if you can walk us through how Facebook uses this data after all for every advertising. So Ben, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Carmela, for that great introduction. I have a few slides to hopefully illustrate some of these ideas that I'll be talking about. So To introduce myself quickly, I'm a software engineer. I've been working at Facebook for over 8 years on ads the whole time. So today I want to tell you a little bit about how an engineer views our ads auction. So I want to begin with our sort of philosophical approach, the mission-oriented way that we approach our work. So the problem is that when we have to choose an ad to show to someone in their Facebook or Instagram newsfeed, there are literally millions of ads to choose from. So we need to have some system to select which ad to show them. Our belief is that the best long-term thing for Facebook is to focus on creating value for people with those advertisements. If you don't create value for people, they're not going to make purchases. They might once, but if they have a bad experience that doesn't lead to a lot of value creation for them, they're not going to do it again. And we see that in our data. When people have a bad experience buying something from a Facebook ad, it dramatically decreases their likelihood of ever buying something from a Facebook ad again. So if you focus on creating value for people, that's the best path to repeated over time interactions with ads. And if we can create value for people that leads to that, that in turn creates value for the businesses who are buying those ads. And only then are those businesses going to, in a long-term sustainable way, keep buying Facebook advertising. So there's sort of this foundation of this whole pyramid begins with creating value for people. And in all of our internal documents and approaches, that's how we think about it. The strategy that we choose for the Facebook auction is to run an auction where Facebook acts as the user's agent. And for each of the ads we're considering, we generate this total bid that's meant to be our best estimate of how much value we expect that ad to create for that person if it were shown to them. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So then we select the ad that has that highest bid, which is expected to be the ad that'll create the most value for the person, and show that. So just for a moment, you could consider an alternative world where ads are not personalized. You don't use as much data. It's not hard to think of examples. Whenever I take the tube here in London to go somewhere and look at the advertisements on the walls, like that's a great example of non-personalized advertising, or the billboards you see on the road, or the stuff I saw on TV when I was a kid. I remember seeing lots of ads for cars and for toothpaste, things that were not particularly relevant to me. And on the London Underground, I see lots of ads for gummies for vitamins and things. The outcome with non-personalized advertising is one where the highest bidder wins. And they win all. They basically dominate the marketplace. This has a lot of negative side effects. It means that it's really, really hard for small businesses to break in because they have to outbid every single other advertiser to reach everybody. What we've done with Facebook's auction is by understanding that value is different for each person, what they find valuable. We've created a totally different system where you don't have to outbid everyone. You can just connect with separate groups of people that are more likely to be interested in the thing that you're trying to reach them. So we think it's a lot better for competition and for innovation amongst businesses. And I can speak to personal experience in my life before Facebook running a startup where I was trying to buy ads to promote my company in a non-personalized environment. And my competitors would just outbid everyone else to specifically try to foreclose entrance into that ecosystem. And I was unable to buy ads at a profitable rate. Facebook tries to make that not happen and to support tons of different entrepreneurs. So this is the formula, actually behind the scenes, the formula of how we compute these bids in the auction. So the final bid is the probability of a conversion. So think of a purchase. The majority of Facebook ads, just to put this out there, are commerce ads. So the prototypical Facebook ad is an ad selling some kind of a product. So think of this as the likelihood that someone will make a purchase if the ad is shown to them, multiplied by the advertiser's bid. In this case, it's how much they're willing to pay for a purchase. Maybe the advertiser is willing to pay $10 per purchase. So that would be a 10 bid. And then there's these correction factors. So the reason we do this, again, is to try to estimate the value that the ad will create for this person. We assume that when people are happy and they make a purchase that they look back in hindsight and feel great about, that they were happy to spend that much money. So the other day I saw an ad for a really cool online service that helps you teach your kids how to code. by teaching them how to make custom mods for Minecraft. And so that was definitely relevant to me. I signed up, and now every Sunday my daughter and I do some custom Minecraft mod coding, and she's learning how to code in Java. I feel great. In hindsight, I'm really happy that Facebook introduced me to this product, and I feel fantastic about it in hindsight. So the amount of money that I spent on that is a lower bound, we assume, on the actual value that the person got. If that was more than I was willing to pay for it, then presumably I wouldn't have bought this thing. My expectation was that I was going to get more value out of this than the amount that I spent. But sometimes we're not happy with our purchases. Like, you buy something and then in hindsight, you're displeased with it. And that's what all these correction factors are about. So we have lots of examples of different correction factors, like a repetition penalty. That's something that you wouldn't be able to measure if you just looked at dollars and cents of how much people are spending. But we spend a lot of time doing research and talking to people and understand people are really frustrated. They see the same ad over and over again. So we have penalties in there to try to prevent these annoying repetitive experiences that degrade the user value, or misleading experiences. Facebook sends surveys to people after they've engaged with ads to say, hey, did you buy the product? Were you happy with it? Did it ship on time? Did it match the description of what you saw in the ad? Was the product quality good? And if people give us negative answers and they say, like, no, it didn't match the ad, or it took a long time to ship, or I'm unhappy with it, that helps us understand that that first factor there might be overestimating the user value. And so we penalize such ads in the auction from advertisers that have a poor track record. Of course, if they have a bad enough track record, we ban them from the platform entirely because they're creating a bad experience for people. And there's lots and lots of other factors, including factors from people who hide and report ads. That's a very powerful signal we give to people. When you hide an ad, it helps us understand, like, okay, we don't know why, but for some reason, this is not creating value for this person. So going one step deeper into this, that first factor there, that probability of a conversion, of a purchase, the probability of a purchase if we show the ad, that's coming from data. So this comes out of our machine learning systems. We train them on historical data about which ads we showed in the past. Some of them led to purchases and some of them didn't. And we ask the machine learning system to try to find patterns, to try to help it understand, why do some ads lead to conversions and why do some ads not? The important factors of what goes in there are data about the person who's being shown the ad, data about the ad itself, and context. Where is this ad being shown? And so for one person, maybe for Carmelo, the likelihood that he makes a purchase after seeing this ad is 1%. And for me, maybe it's 2%. But these are these probabilities of the likelihood if we show this ad to this person, it'll result in a purchase. So that's the formula. Carmelo and I are having an interesting discussion about what are some of the effects that this has. And one, I think, somewhat non-obvious effect is that one of the things that happens with personalized advertising is it leads to diminishing returns. So what this means is that as a business increases the ad budget that they spend, they continue to see more and more and more purchases, but there's diminishing returns, like everything else in life. Because what that auction is going to do is it's going to start by trying to show the ad to the people that are most likely to convert and for whom other advertisers are comparatively bidding less. Facebook runs a second price auction. So if you're the highest bidder, you don't pay that price. You only pay the second highest auction price. And so there might be really, really significant discounts in areas where this is by far the most relevant ad. So over time, as you increase your budget, the auction has to go try to find people that are somewhat less likely or somewhat more expensive. And so this diminishing returns happens. So I think it's helpful to ground ourselves on the way normal advertisers think, which is in terms of return on investment. They think about unit economics. So what is the marginal cost of a conversion? And what's the profit that I generate per conversion? And so the rational advertiser stops spending where that's going to become a loss, right? Where the cost of getting one more conversion is actually greater than the profit that they would earn. So in this particular curve here, let's say that the business makes 30 euros of profit per purchase. Then they should actually stop spending at about 1,000 euros of ad budget there. Because at that point, the slope of that line is 30 euros per purchase. To get the 101st purchase, they'd have to spend, oh, it's my timer, they'd have to spend an extra 30 euros to get that. So I think the impact that this has on competition is that advertisers spend across multiple channels. And for each of the channels that they spend across, they're going to stop spending for all those channels at that same point. So there's not really a competitive aspect where one channel doing a better, more efficient job drops their spend elsewhere, because it would be rational to spend to this same point across all those channels. And then just very briefly, what would be the impact of removing personalization? So you can imagine a counterfactual world where instead of estimating this probability based on personal data, you could only use data about the ad in the context. And the impact of that would be that this is just not a very good estimate. For some people, it's a gross overestimate, and for some, it's a gross underestimate. And ad budgets are just going to be spent significantly less efficiently, creating less value for businesses. And we've run an experiment of exactly this on Facebook's ad network to understand what would happen. And I'll send a link in the chat to the results. What we saw was just removing this from ranking alone resulted in a greater than 50% drop in the publisher revenues on Audience Network. So wrapping up, we think that the ads-driven business model is a really, really great model. It creates a ton of value for people by helping them connect to products and services that are going to be relevant to them. We think it's a great business model for entrepreneurs by helping them, even if they have a small ad budget, connect with the people that are going to love their product. It's also a great thing for apps and websites that want to be either discounted or free. Facebook is hardly the only example of an app or website that wants to be free for everyone around the world to use. And I think that has a really positive impact on society too. It's a democratizing, equalizing force for everyone, regardless of their own personal wealth level, to be able to get access to free services. So I'll stop there and we can move on to the next speaker.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben, for this illustration. Granted, is the perspective from Facebook, but here we are discussing some of those points, and as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's no doubt that this creates an immense amount of benefits, particularly for those companies that can actually leverage the user and information flow of Facebook to target their customers. But the concern again is that you touch upon some of these points, and I would like you maybe to just follow up quickly on particularly the diminishing returns issue that you mentioned, and also why do you think there is not there is really not competition with other channels on this, so why is not disclosure? Because actually the argument is completely the opposite, that because Facebook is attracting a lot of attention of the user through a number of services that is providing for free, at the end is locking the user into its services, and this will give Facebook an advantage in processing a lot of data that get better at that algorithm and provide greater value, granted, for the advertisers, because they will have a higher return on their spending. But this will foreclose opportunities for other companies or alternative channels to get to the same business user in a sense, right? So let alone what this means for the final users of the service. But only on the advertisement space, this can actually foreclose competition rather than being the rose picture that you have lined up there. What is your view on this?
Well, that's just not what I think we see in practice. What we see in practice is that most advertisers run their ads across many different channels, and they're always comparing the performance that they get across all those channels. And this same thing you see about diminishing returns is going to manifest itself on all of those different channels. And to a large extent, they're sort of independent, right? Because when you run the ads, you're going to reach a different set of people. If I'm an advertiser and I'm spending profitably on Pinterest and TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Google, if Facebook improves its algorithm, great, maybe I'll spend more there because the marginal cost will improve. But if I'm profitably acquiring purchases from another channel, why would I stop spending there? Like if it's profitable and I'm getting more return on investment than the ad budget I'm spending in, it wouldn't be rational for me to pull that ad budget, right? And so Facebook has billions of users. No single advertiser is ever reaching all of them. That auction is going to select some very small subset of those people. And the other platforms that you can run ads on, other channels, are going to give you access to different sets of people. And even if you are reaching the same person on multiple channels, that's actually desirable. Many times, we want to have marketing messages reach people more than one time to try to level that in. So I think it's just a rational thing to look at each channel and see what is the rational maximum value that you get from spending on all of it.
Right. So if I get your point, correctly, you basically hinted to a couple of things here. So first is the issue of, well, not the issue, is the feature of multi-homing that, also maybe because it is, most of the services are free. I mean, the barriers for people to multi-home are basically zero, and they do multi-home across service. And so they may reach out. And the second is that, I mean, you say independent, I will, in strategy, we will use the term differentiated, right? So that the platforms might be differentiated, so they might actually also structure interactions that are different. And so if, your argument is correct that there is personalized advertisement which hints to different valuations by users, those may also differ across the platforms, right? So there is not a standardized one-for-one bidding, which might actually go to this zero, zero-sum type of competition, but is more of a dynamic process, if I get your point.
That's right. Every one of these platforms has access to different information. They're going to make different estimates. And as such, even in a multi-homing world, you're very unlikely to have your ad shown to the same set of people. So, ultimately, advertisers are going to go where people spend their time. And Facebook doesn't have a lock-in on all of people's time. People spend their time on all kinds of different apps and websites, and they're going to want to reach people wherever they go, wherever it's profitable to do so, and they're getting positive return on investment.
All right. Terrific. We will discuss, I guess, more on this later on. But thanks a lot for this presentation. Morgan, I will turn to the other bit of our corporate world, and this is one way of using data, obviously, or providing or organizing a market for data on the advertisement side. But you represent lots of SME that use data also to innovate and create service to start with, not just to reach out to this. And also on one of the reports that you publish as the association, I was interested by some of your points raising concern against some of the proposals that are coming through the DMA and DSA, which might treat the platforms more as an infrastructure utilities. And you were actually saying that this might be harmful to some of the business models of the SME. So I will just go to you, and if you can tell us a little bit more about these different implications for the SMEs.
Oh, of course. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to the Digital Markets Forum for inviting the App Association on this panel. So you rightly mentioned we represent software developers and connected device companies that are all small and medium-sized enterprises, and together we're part with Facebook and the others of a 1.4 trillion euros app ecosystem. So I'm glad to be able to communicate the perspective of our members who rely on platforms to exist, to grow, to reach consumers, innovate, and are often platforms themselves, building new, exciting products that are data-driven every day. And so the way how our members can use and share data affects how the product function and how consumers engage with those products and services. And throughout the last several years, regulators and policymakers have been taking a hard look at big tech, raising concerns about competition in digital marketplaces. And this scrutiny has put the spotlight on the app development community and our relationship with platform, in particular for us, the app stores. And this includes the way platforms share and use data with business users. So, however, there's more limited attention that has been given to the benefits and the value created by these online platforms. And for app developers, it's mostly about the app stores. And maybe to take a step back, I think it's important to remember that this incredible growth of the app economy happened in just over 13 years. And this, to a very large extent, stems from this symbiotic relationship that business users have with platforms and with consumers. And so more than being just a one-stop shop, allowing small app developers to access global markets, which is actually key, developers have the ability to offload all the overhead costs, like managing payment options. They have access to thousands of application programming interfaces, to programming tools, consumer data analytics tools provided by platforms allow developers to really improve and customize their services for their business, for the consumer base. So in this regard, we also sometimes take for granted that the platform function as are necessary to fuel a trusted ecosystem that lives on our smart devices now. And sometimes data collection and the centralization of data by platform is necessary to detect hackers, fraud, malicious use of apps, and so on. And this is crucial for us because consumer trust and the willingness to share information with an app maker is critical for developers to succeed in this market. And without this, consumers will unlikely hand over the credit card details to any app company, and that will limit the uptake of new services. And in this regards, like the centralized data governance by platform is an essential element to build trust. And with the DMA, we can talk about it at a later stage, but we are concerned that some of the new obligation in Digital Markets Act could reduce this trust by being applied across all platforms and not on a case-by-case basis. So platforms compete heavily in this regard to attract the next best app. There's also can create some tension between privacy and security requirements when collecting data. Certain proposals to reduce software platforms' gatekeeping function could put the users' personal or vital data at risk. But that being said, I think that when we look at platform competition, there's this assumption that leveraging of data by platforms is anti-competitive, and this is not always the case. Small app developers, they build more and more innovative solutions as they adopt technologies such as virtual reality, connection with smart objects, artificial intelligence algorithm to analyze user data collected through the apps, but also combine with other sources. And some of our members, they innovate greatly in this regard. For example, one of our members, Greenly, a French app developer, is able to inform users on the greenhouse gas emission generated by the consumption pattern obtained via the bank transaction. And this app takes advantage of the consequences of the European Revised Payment Directive, which obliges banks to make banking information available to third-party applications with the consent, obviously, with users. Another example is app telemetry. It's a new service that helps app and web developers improve their product by supplying immediate, accurate data analytics of how a user uses the app. It's heavily privacy focused, only uses anonymized data, only communicating the data that is really necessary to improve user engagement and drive business growth and therefore innovation. And these are great examples of how leveraging data can really help businesses innovate, and this is something that should be kept and not hindered in the future. And so in the app economy, there are many different business models. Of course, Ben highlighted some app developers can just maybe just charge for the download of their apps. They can offer subscription-based. They can also provide free apps with in-app purchases or be displaying advertisement. All of these can be combined. And typically for gaming apps, where the games are monetized for a combination of in-app ads and in-app purchases. In the EU, for example, video games account for 67% of the total revenues generated via app stores. But as a user, you're going to pay either way for your service, with your money or with your data. With money, it seems very clear and transparent. When it's a free model, the user does have some sense that the product is not truly free, but it's good that there are different business models out there that provide variety of ecosystem as long as there's transparency and informed consent. So today, many apps compete heavily on privacy. They are working hard to produce tech-driven privacy features to address evolving consumer expectation and technical reality. So to come back to platform competition, I think leveraging data is not always harmful. It provides great opportunities to SMEs. It's important to keep those diverse business models as long as there's transparent and there's informed consent. In general, not collecting, storing, or info beyond what is needed to accomplish what you want is important, anonymizing everything. But yes, of course, afterwards we can talk about the Digital Markets Act in a bit more detail, but maybe I'll stop there as a presentation of how SMEs use and leverage data.
Thank you, Morgan. I have a very quick, follow-up question. So if, the argument is basically if it is so great, right? I mean, that you can free up lots of innovation by, granting and giving access to this data. Why not making that even more open, right? So because I mean that is where the policy draft, I mean, they're going now. So opening up even more, right? I mean, this bank of data that the platforms are sitting on, and therefore, making them really available to all, developers and firms, small or large out there, so that they can freely use the data for, to innovate or to, create service and reach out to customers. Why is that a problem from your own perspective, from app developers? Is not actually a positive aspect?
So opening up all the data to everybody, I mean, it does create certain concerns. As I mentioned, there's this very important component in the online ecosystem, is the fact that there needs to be trust whatever happens. I'm talking on the app developer side, and small developers, meaning those that rely on app stores, for example, and they rely on the trust that these ecosystems provide. And this is why it's key that when you open up just data in general, that's extremely broad, but there needs to be a minimum level of gatekeeping to ensure certain security in there. And this is particularly important for the smallest ones, because they rely on these features. They don't have the resources to build all the services that they get from the platforms in-house, at least not at the beginning. Therefore, there needs to be the right balance between how much you can share. I need to share as much as possible, but at the same time, keeping key security and privacy features there. I think that's the most important thing. And all platforms function differently. I'm talking here about app stores, but of course, I mean, search engines, social media, retailers, these are all different. That's why, for example, some obligations in the Digital Markets Act should be important to analyze concretely how these will impact all the users in the online ecosystem, one ecosystem, from users to businesses, and to apply those obligations on a case-by-case basis where it makes sense.
All right, thanks. We move to more of the academic side and angle of this. So Joanna, we've been discussing, leveraging data for creating or reaching out to customers, but from an academic point of view, you have done a number of studies on this. So I'm just asking you, how do actually, firms leverage the data to engage users, and particularly what are then the implications of these strategies for competition?
Yes, so thank you, Carmelo. Thank you for the invitation. I decided today to take a little bit of an alternative perspective and focus on user engagement, and maybe challenge a little bit our discussion about data by introducing an example of a case that we have been working the last 2 years, which is not necessarily about data. So my focus will be on how user engagement in social media can actually facilitate social media to increase their revenues without necessarily focusing on data. So let me briefly go through some slides that I have, but I don't think it's necessary to share with you because it will simply create more, let's say, distraction. But when it goes to user engagement, as Ben mentioned before, it's mainly about behavior, right? And what people do. And nowadays we have so many different ways of measuring user engagement in the platform. So the focus has been both in academia and, as we heard from Ben, on collecting this data and exploiting data. However, originally this term that comes from marketing and actually human-computer interaction focuses a lot on the interaction of users with the platform features. And that implies that somehow the technology is enabling or constraining users when they actually interact with a particular feature. So why is this important? Because what I would like to introduce here, it's not only the behavioral aspect of user engagement that will bring actually more data, but also the cognitive and the emotional aspect, which have been also thoroughly actually studied in the marketing field. and highlight them, because when it comes to data and users, it's important to see what kind of motivations and how we can actually make them more involved with the platform in order to generate revenue. So basically, I will present a model which is building on the question of whether user engagement actually means only more data, or if there are different, let's say, scenarios. And of course, as I mentioned before, that depends both on the specific technological characteristics of the platform and its features, as well as the strategic intent. So if we think about value co-creation, as Ben described before, more data improve the algorithm, they improve the personalization, they actually allow for better matching. We can also combine that with data network effects and learning effects. And in many platforms, more data are actually bringing more value. However, there are some platforms that they focus more on user attention. So data is there, but it's not necessarily something that it's of the highest importance. And as I said, we did this study of Snapchat, which is potentially a competitor on Facebook, but as I will explain in a moment, not really. It is a social media platform that is targeting young people between 16 to 27. Actually, we interview almost 100 of them, either through individual interviews or focus groups. And we try to understand this platform because it has a different main feature that represents its, let's say, identity in the users. And this has to do with the so-called perishable content, which means that they have two main features, the snaps and the stories, where the content that is shared between users, it disappears either in a few seconds or within 24 hours. This content is basically pictures or very small video clips. And of course, they can be edited. But as we can see here, we have a counterintuitive model where actually, instead of keeping the data available and trying to engage the users through sharing, through liking, through commenting, through the traditional ways that we have seen in other social media platforms, here the content disappears. So the question is, what's going on when it comes to the behavior? And what we do see is that people actually share more data than in other platforms. That's one of the findings of our study. And actually, they share data that it's of their everyday life. They are pictures or small videos that they are more trivial, they are more funny, they are perhaps sometimes more intimate. And the platform is generating revenue through ads, but in a different way than obviously Facebook, by actually engaging the users with the brand, either through the stories, where actually along to their friend stories, they see stories related to the brand, or by asking companies to sponsor specific filters and specific tools to make the snaps kind of funnier or more, unique. So for the people to share, to get more enjoyment out of it. So why this is an interesting case? It is an interesting case because what we see here is that what they try to sell is not the data of the users, but it is the attention of the users. And they try to engage the users with a brand through particular interaction, especially when it comes to these filters, as I say, or these augmented reality solutions that they have. And it's very interesting to see when it comes to user engagement, how the different dimensions that I mentioned before, they actually, in aggregate, push the users towards more engagement and thus more time spent in the platform or less. So except of the behavioral dimension that, as you can imagine, implies increased frequency of use and more time consumed in the platform, we also notice a cognitive dimension where actually people felt less concerned about privacy. So basically this privacy concern, which is a big debate today in our panel, it's not a big issue there. So I'm not saying that there are no privacy problem. I'm just saying that the users, they don't perceive this privacy as a problem, and that increases their engagement or the time they spend in the platform. And we also saw in the affective dimension that I mentioned before, a lot of positive emotions, so joy, fun. It has become an environment where actually trust is built through this combination of the different dimensions, and people exchange funny things, private things, because they believe that they will disappear, so they feel more relaxed in some ways. Of course, there are also negative reactions because some people feel the anxiety of missing out, that they will not really manage in 10 seconds to enjoy what their friends are sharing with them. And this creates some challenges. But all in all, by combining these three dimensions, we get a better understanding of how the platform can actually exploit user engagement, not necessarily by focusing on data, but by focusing on the user attention. And finally, in this study, something that I would like to also discuss later with the rest of the panel has to do with the competition. What we learn is that when we investigate the interaction of the user with the technology and understanding what are the limitations and what are the opportunities of the user to interact with a particular feature, we see some things that they go a little bit outside perhaps what one would expect, and similar to what Ben mentioned, that users are actually using many platforms and they don't perceive them as competitive. They see them as complementary. So basically, they are sharing different types of contents in different platforms. They enjoy the platforms differently. So in Snapchat, you have this kind of private, informal type of content sharing. In Facebook, you have more sophisticated. In Instagram, you have the most professional one that you want to really get a lot of likes and a lot of, approval. And also the social networks that underlying the user sharing are actually different versions of the same network. So basically on Snapchat, you have a very small network where it's basically your family and some close friends because of the nature of the information you share. Then on Facebook, it expands. And then on Instagram, obviously, you have a very large audience where you would like to share your content. So I would like to bring this final observation as a starting point for later in our discussion, because I do not necessarily believe that there is so direct competition, especially when the platforms keep the diversity. So they keep a business model that diversifies them from other platforms. In the user eyes, they have complementarities, and actually they can peacefully coexist despite the fact that actually users are using all of them. Thank you. And I will stop, I think, here. I don't know how I do time-wise. Yeah.
You did fantastic, time and content wise. So, very much appreciated. And also,
I see Ben smiling.
and also, also because, you bring in a couple of points that, I think it will be addressed in the next by the other speakers on the panel. But, is of course, the issue of privacy and the issue of competition. Is it a really competition? Is competition on a zero-sum game, which is, which often we have in mind, if you buy product A, it means that you're not going to buy product B, while instead, in some of the cases, for the platforms, we observe that, you actually affiliate with a platform, and you also affiliate with another platform because you enjoy the platform differently. And as academics, we all know that because we use, social media in a different way for different reasons. But we'll get to those points. And I'm also, sharing some content. You remind me of a recent study by one of our colleagues that's done a survey showing, this multi-homing behavior by users. Is it really true that there is not tipping, or is that, users are multi-homing? So I think that the study is quite, brings evidence that to the point that you are mentioning here, Joanna. But moving to this, more to this privacy issue and value, right? So you said that at the end of the day, consumers do not seem to be concerned with privacy, particularly in the case where they have, in context where they have, this positive drivers and emotions. But Alexandra, I would like to actually turn to you now. Should we just focus on economic value? Because you've been raised also your voice that this is not just an issue of economic value, it's an issue also of societal values. And when it comes particularly to the policy, and the regulations that were drafted in, and it comes also in, some of these geopolitical issues that brings back, what are the values that we need to stand for, and then how should we treat this? So how do you see this?
Yes, thank you very much, Carmelo, and thank you very much for the invitation. I must confess that I have followed all the series so far, So for me, it's like to be invited in your favorite series and play in it. So it's quite, I was very happy for the invitation. And indeed, as you say, I would like to take a step back and discuss about value and society here. And I want to make really three quick points. The first is that when we discuss the regulation of online advertising, and this is something which is very much discussed now in Brussels in the context of the Digital Service Act negotiation, I think we also need to discuss and compare the different business models that we have in platform. And this is why I think this forum, as other conferences, are very useful, because you cannot, discuss a regulation in isolation of the business model. And I think too often this is something which is missing in the Parliament or in the Council. So the second point I want to make is that it's important to focus on business model, that's clear, but those business models are not neutral with regard to the implication on user engagement and competition. This is what the previous speakers have said, and I couldn't agree more. But it's also, those business models have also impact on societal values. And I think this is very important, because this is a fundamental issue. And there is, I think, in all the debate about, business model which are financed with ads, a fundamental question, and the fundamental question, one fundamental question is, do we think that so essential services which are so essential, like search, like social network, do we think that to have financing of those services with online advertising correspond to our value? Now, my point is not to say that the answer is necessarily no, because I recognize perfectly, as Ben has said, that there is a lot of positive effect, and in fact, cross-subsidization within a country and also across country. I mean, there is a lot of cross-subsidization between the Western country and the global South because of ad business model. So my point is not to say that the answer is necessarily, it's not good, but I think it is a very important question to raise, in particular because we know that ad financing will impact and affect the platform incentive and their behavior. Now, we have heard Ben, and I think it was extremely interesting how he explained how it works. I want also to quote two experts from Stanford, which wrote in '97. Now, of course, things have changed maybe since then, and that would be something I would like to discuss with Ben at some point if we can. But so those two experts were written that we can expect that advertising-funded search engine will be, and I am quoting here, will be inherently biased towards the advertiser and away from the need of consumer. Now, this is a paper which probably you have recognized by now, which was written by Brain and Page, and this is in fact the PageRank paper. And so, of course, things may have changed, but it would be interesting to see whether what they were written in '97 is maybe not right anymore. And the last point I wanted to say is that if we want to limit ad-based business model, now again, my point is not to say that we should. I think we should have a discussion on it, but I recognize that there is a lot of positive effect, but there is also, as always in life, a lot of danger. But if we want to limit that or regulate it more, we need to think about alternatives. And my problem is that when I see all those discussions about regulating more personalization or online advertising, the alternative is not really discussed. But what is the alternative? And I think, do we want therefore to go more to a subscription-based business model or transaction-based business model? Or do we want to do what we have done for the provision of other essential services like internet access or electricity or water, to develop a kind of universal service model, which would be therefore a subscription-based model, but then for those who cannot afford the price of the subscription, then you will have the states intervening as a kind of a social safety net. Now, again, my point is not to say that this is necessarily the way forward, but my point is to say that for essential services, my point is to say that I think search and social network have become essential services. We need to raise the question whether we agree that those are mostly financed with ad, and if we think that it's not corresponding to our European value, what could be the alternative. And finally, I mean, and my point is that we have other ways in the past of providing models of providing public services. Now, if we go to that way of developing a universal service idea of those services, I think those could be linked with an emerging concept that the Commission is pushing in this digital compass communication. For those who are not closely following the debate in Brussels, I mean, the Commission adopted in March this year a kind of strategy communication regarding digital, which is called the Digital Compass. And there the Commission developed the concept of digital citizenship. And clearly I think there is a link between digital citizenship and universal service of fundamental digital services like search or social network or other. So I'm sorry, I'm raising more question than answer, but I think we have to have that debate, because too often I think the debate is too focused on one little nitty-gritty stuff and lose the broad picture and the possibility of alternative.
Terrific. I'm actually very happy. I mean, first of all, that you're taking part as an active speaker this time in the forum, and second, that you're raising questions, because I mean, this is like, as you know, like we are intended to do in this forum. We don't want to just, put their simplistic, flag, ideas, whether, this is wrong or right, but debating more onto things that are complex by nature. And going back to your point, I mean, the conundrum here is really that, again, if we think right, I mean, at these models, and if we, one may say that actually the free models, right, or the ads based, that because they're doing the subsidizations of the service, they're actually, more democratic tools, right, to gain to bring access to important service to masses, right, of people that otherwise would not have, right. And so this is a debate that moving beyond US and Europe, we should actually consider, because there is there's the world outside there that has now been empowered because of the service. So your question is fundamental here, right. So if we don't go with this, what will be the alternative, right? So some will say, well, it will be a better world because the platforms will compete on terms of quality for the service, and then people will pay just for the quality. Yes, but that might actually restrict the people to 10% of the population. So, and the other question will be also the impact on firms, not just on individuals, because, and I think that this is a point that Morgan was bringing here, that actually this might create more distortion than benefits if we consider small versus large firms. So the small firms rely more heavily on the services that are provided by the platforms in gathering this. And so it's not clear to me what Alex, you were describing, if we have this universal access, how that will be regulated and subsidized by then, the state, right? So if it's not subsidized by the firm, in this case, the platform, will that be subsidized by the state? But how does the state, will provide this, equal access to all the companies and the users out there? So great questions for the discussion later on, and I think it's actually great introductions to the next speaker, to Jan. So talking about these differences between the business model, right? So the ads based and subscription based, really for the economic value, but also for values, as Alex was bringing in. Yeah, and you done work on this, so
yes, thank you, Carmelo. So first of all, it's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, actually not necessarily done work directly on the differentiation between subscription-based and ad-based, but nevertheless, I can share some views on this. And in doing so, let me also pick up some threads that have come up in the previous talks, which touch upon this, and I think quite interesting. And sometimes I disagree as well. So one thing I think that we should make clear from the beginning is that the internet economy, at least the big services that we're talking about, is first and foremost an attention economy. So in this regard, also subscription-based or ad-based really doesn't matter so much, because in the end, you need to be engaging as a service, because otherwise you're not being used. So people will not buy a subscription, and people will not see ads and use your service if you're not bringing something to the table. That's actually interesting. This is also where I disagree, a little bit with the worldview of that Ben has been proposing, because what he's been talking about very much is that you can use data very much to increase targeting abilities on the platform. And with that, I agree. That the pie is large enough for everyone, because advertisers will go to every platform. They will not just resort to one platform. Generally, I also agree that advertisers will go to different channels, but if you don't grab the attention of the consumer, you can't sell ads. You can only sell ads as long as consumers are actually on your platform. And that is slightly a different matter. So one thing is using data for targeting on a platform. And actually most consumers, studies that show that consumers don't mind targeting at all. Actually, they like seeing relevant ads, very much in line with what Ben has said, rather than seeing, ads for diapers and you don't even have kids. Yeah, it's much more important to see ads that you're actually relevant on. But there's a distinct issue, is why you're on the platform in the first place. You're probably not on the platform in the first place to see advertisements, not even relevant advertisements. You're on the platform because you want to do something else. And for that, you need to be engaging as a platform. And in this way, you use data in a different way. And that might be worrisome, because you might be showing content just to keep the consumer on, and that is not directly related to targeting advertisements. Now, coming back to the difference between subscription-based and advertising business models in the way that they use data. So I made this one point already. I make another related point, which is what you just, Camillo, just have put up as well, is that there will always be a tremendous attractiveness of free services vis-a-vis subscription-based services for a number of reasons. First of all, they're free, so you're not paying anything directly. So that might have reasons that people have different incomes, and free service means actually everyone can afford it, no matter how much money you make. That's great. But there's also a lot of psychological effects associated with that when you compete against, for example, subscription-based services. So they have a large attractiveness because they're supposedly free. You underestimate the costs that come with it in terms of the data that you give out, or the time that you spend and should have been spending with your kids or so instead, while using the service. And there's also psychological effects with respect to privacy. So you're giving away a lot of data, although you're saying that you're concerned about the use of your data, the well-known privacy paradox. And also because a lot of e-services are actually experience goods. So in the beginning, you're not willing to pay a lot for a service that you don't know whether you're actually using it or whether it's good or not. So for that, an initial price, and the zero price is a low initial price, is actually good. Now, where's the difference now exactly with the subscription-based and the advertising-based models? If you think about grabbing attention, it's actually not so clear what the difference is, because both free services and subscription-based services need to grab attention, and attention is limited of consumers. So I'm disagreeing with the fact that you can have a great service and then it's just complementary and you will just add on the time budget. At some point you will have to economize. There's only 24 hours in a day, and at some point you will substitute with your attention, whether you're using one service or another. And in that regard, also subscription-based services need to be engaging, right? So if I'm using, if Netflix is competing against YouTube, for example, in that regard, so if I'm spending all my time looking at YouTube videos, and I find out at the end of the month I've not looked at Netflix because I didn't find it engaging, then probably I'm canceling my subscription with Netflix the next time around. Yeah. So in that regard, also on subscription-based services, there is a need for using data to make it engaging for the consumer, right? You want to be, Netflix wants you to be binge watching, for example, because that means, you're addicted and you play, let's say in a good sense, and you're actually prolonging your subscription to another month. But there's also a fundamental difference in terms of the, well, not fundamental, but it's a gradual difference in terms of how engaging you have to be. Because with an advertising funded model, actually losing attention has a direct cost on you. It's a first order effect. So if you're not right now on the platform, not engaging with it, you can't be shown ads and you're losing out money directly as a platform. Whereas with Netflix, to stay with that example, if you don't like the movie you've seen and you stop watching it, then you're not canceling your subscription right away. It's only if that happens repeatedly, and if you're not feeling engaged repeatedly, then you're canceling subscription. So, but this is a second order effect. So in that sense, it's more indirect. And so the incentives to actually be engaging and using data for engagement is stronger on advertising funded models. And that needs to be taken into account. Now, but to make that point again, both need data. Right, both need data to be able to survive, and they need data to grab attention, and that is a distinct factor than using data for using targeted advertising. So maybe a final thought on this, and then I'll close, is how do we remedy this? How do we go about with this? And here I'm agreeing also with what Carmelo has sort of suggested before, that we probably need to free data a little bit from the places where it's being created, preserving trust of the consumer and preserving innovation incentives. So if data is actually useful in the sense that I've said before, for driving innovation, for driving user engagement, for being relevant, then of course it's a little bit problematic if you restrict that data to very, very few entities, so they can only drive those innovation. Innovation is best if it's being decentralized, and it can occur in many different places. So in that regard, limiting the use of data at a firm also necessarily is not the right way forward. So there's some proposals on you need to silo data, you cannot share data between the different services that you're making, for example, and you should collect much less data in the first place. I'm not saying it's generally bad, but this will limit also the things you can do, and the things of the innovations you can do, and the relevancy of ads and stuff like that you can do. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but you could also share that data, and you could also, for example, preserve it, preserve trust of consumers if you let consumers share the data directly. So consumers can port their data, more for an example, in a continuous manner, real-time continuous manner, and then that would be trust preserving, because you're not doing it on their behalf, they're actually doing it themselves. There's much more we can discuss about this, and I believe Georges will also touch upon this issue, so I'll leave it for here for the moment, and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Jan. So number of points that you bring in here for the discussion, mostly related to, I mean, there are some aspects on the implications for competition that we'll probably discuss later, and they relate also to some extent to, well, some points are going to the directions that Ben was mentioned before. Others, actually, there's some contrast. So you're saying that basically attention, there is some direct competition for attention because there is some fixed amount of attention. So there is some of that zero-sum game into this is now. So that's your point. So to some extent, bringing attention to one platform might limit actually the attention, the time that you can spend on others. And then there's this aspect on the remedies. So what to do? So your call is, so we need to free up a little bit, so that we don't create, this walled gardens. But at the same time, with the data silos might be a bad idea, because then you're throwing away also the value creation aspect of it, and so it's not a remedy. It's actually fixing one problem by creating a bigger one. Speaking about these remedies, Yorgos, so you've been writing on this, and actually also some of the regulatory failures on regulating data, I mean privacy. So bringing back, to the GDPR, for instance, and then you're advocating an alternative on how to free up more of this value through the data, through the in situ access. But you can tell us a little bit more of this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carmelo. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel of distinguished speakers. And I think Jan also gave an ideal path to build on that. Indeed, data sharing can help to boost incentives for innovation, creating more innovative markets, and also create more value out of these markets. And in fact, the starting point is that data has a central role in value creation. And let me refer particularly to the interaction data when users, they meet within the platforms, either in the demand side, individuals, consumers, or in the supply side or cross side, supply side, app developers, external producers and advertisers and so on. So this interaction can create information. So it's valuable. So platforms get this information, they collect it, they analyze it, they use it as an input to their algorithmic systems that they have been advanced a lot over the last decades with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And they can better assess how to match supply and demand, how to provide some classification information that it is helpful to define interactions in the efficient way. And this clearly has value. Without that, would have been lost by incurring large search cost in order to find an ideal match for what we are looking. Data is crucial because it confers information that is vital for providing market efficiency, and also it contributed to the creation of new markets. With this respect, we need to study to check what are the implications on the current data distribution and information distribution on competition, but also on the welfare. So if we go to this aspect, I would say that the value creation can be reinforced through a data feedback loop. Once we can use data which provides information, but we use also data to train algorithmic systems that we use. So algorithmic systems with this training function of data become better and better. And as a result, better information, better algorithms mean better quality of products and services. And clearly, there is an advantage of the platforms that they have access to a large amount of data in improving their services and products in comparison to the ones that they lack this access to sufficient scale of data in order to improve to some good extent their services. But this data feedback loop is also reinforced by network effects. Network effects, and that is something we should clarify, they exist both online and offline. In a flea market, more buyers will attract more sellers and vice versa. But what we observe in online platforms is that in addition to that, is the data-driven network effects that depend also on economies of scale and scope in data aggregation. Data collected from one set of users can improve the service quality for another set of users. So the larger and more comprehensive the data sets collected by the platform, the higher the quality of the service, up to the point where diminishing returns to scale and scope set in, which is an empirical question and an open question when we reach this point. The fact that we have these data-driven effects also generates a social value of aggregate data that it is higher than the private value. Platform that maximizes profits try to keep data and share data in a way that will not give a rise to this intermediation, probably will generate a different value from the social value if we had a better information sharing mechanism. And that is a potential source of market failure. So it is not that we don't have value created from this system that we have of the data distribution that we have so far. We have some competitive advantage of data that may create some problems, but I think the generic, the important problem is the information structure and the asymmetries we have there. The platform itself has much more information over this interaction data from the other parties that participate in the platform, like its users. And competition policy clearly does not suffice to address that, and it is not the right instrument to do that. And the idea and the approach that we develop is that we need to define data rights, so new data rules, which maximize welfare and efficiency gains, and that ensure also a fair distribution of these gains across all the actors of the ecosystem, and also contribute to the dynamic innovation and efficiency gains by reducing barriers to entry, as Jan already mentioned. And if we go to this data rules framework, I mean, the natural starting point for Europe will be the GDPR and data portability. But we haven't seen data portability work well in practice. There are major problems. So one is the definition. Jan and Alex has written extensively about that. Which data can be shared? Is it the interaction data, the one that can be shared? We don't know. But there are also practical problems with data portability. Consider, for example, someone sharing her data from Facebook to another platform. This interaction data concerns also the data with a person, the friend of hers that interacted with, but does not have any permission to share the data of her friend. Will share only her data. So we'll share the data out of context, and that reduce value for the data through this sharing. So an alternative way, and this is what we propose, is to share information by accessing data in situ. Data remains always at the location where it is collected in the platform's infrastructure. But when a user feels like sharing her data, gives a consent to another firm, and the other firm bring its algorithm on platform infrastructure, it accesses the data there as an input to the algorithmic system that will transfer there, run their behavior exercises and analysis with this data, and in this way it can provide get a better information about this user. And if there are many users that will do that, also that data will have value. This access will have value in an aggregate level of getting a better information about how to improve their services across these users following the data feedback loop. So having this definition of new rights, which allow this information sharing, not data sharing, but doing that in a way that data does not move. So that also helps to protect data through encryption techniques, through privacy techniques in a much better way, will help us to provide more symmetric information structures, and will also empower users with more rights over the data so that they can get direct benefits out of that, which also can give rise to markets for data, consumer data pools, which will aggregate this benefit to further benefit of users. So we develop a new mechanism for better distribution of information, and in a way that we solve some of the practical problems that data portability generates. Having said that, let me stop here and we can continue the discussion.
This is like, I mean, the right point where to stop, because it allows us actually to shift back to the discussion and connect to some of the points that have been raised earlier. So the first question is really back, to all the panelists, but I'm looking particularly at Jan and Alex also, because you raised the point. Would this mechanism actually be a remedy that keeps that value creation aspect that is embedded in the centralized governance that the platforms run. But it also releases part of this pro-competitive or fix part of this potential anti-competitive aspect that locking the data within one particular ecosystem. So that's question number one. And question number two, which connects more to Joanna's point earlier, are we focusing maybe too much on the wrong issue, though, that we think that that all the competition is on data and lacking or grabbing attention of users with the data, but in fact platforms are engaging users for different for different types of attention, where data then is not really the issue here when it comes to competition across the platform. So I don't know what is the order, but maybe Jan, Joanna, and Alex, and Ben, also feel free to jump in.
Yes, maybe I can say some words on these in situ rights that Georgios has proposed. And of course, I read his article on this carefully, and I've talked with Marshall about this also in another panel. I think it's a complementary approach, but neither one really is the one that sort of is better than the other for several reasons. So in terms of, let me compare it with data portability for the moment. So many of the issues that Georgios has raised can also be fixed. So we can be much clearer about the scope of the data. We could have a more fine granular consent management for consumers, where they also can consent to the data transfers that pertain to their data of others, right? So that is something we could do. We could have more real-time data portability, continuous data portability through APIs, which are already existing. And the advantage of that would also be that you can actually source data from different companies and combine them, in a personal information management system or some other third party. And this is something that you cannot do so well with these in situ rights. So with these in situ rights, you're actually bringing your algorithm to a company that currently sits on the data. First question with that is, you can potentially run, do computationally heavy stuff there. So who's paying for this? So there needs to be some compensation for that. Then you can only run the algorithm on the data that is residing with that company, not on the data that's residing with another company at the same point. So combining data sources is more problematic. Potentially there can also be solutions, but those are being very, very complex then. And you're also potentially sending an algorithm to a firm, and there's ways to protect it, but nevertheless, you're sending your innovative, if you think you have a better search algorithm than Google, and you're sending it to Google, right, to run it there, I might be skeptical of that if you're completely okay with this. So I think so to put it back together, so these in situ is actually very similar also to what has been discussed as data trusts. Where data is being transferred to a third party, and that can actually also reside within another firm. So I think that discussion is very similar. And in the end, I think they're complementary approaches, and there's probably use cases for both of them. So we should not think of one being superior to the other, but actually consider both in practice for different scenarios. And with that, I'll hand over.
Okay, maybe I could say something here. I think actually I agree with Jan that first of all, when it comes to attention, we have so much time for attention. Obviously, there is a competition of attention, but what I'm hearing here is some very sophisticated models. And today I decided to wear a little bit the hat of the user just to provoke the discussion. I really admire these models, and I have read some of them, and I think that they're really exciting. But remember that especially when it comes to social media platforms, it's about entertainment. So if you start pushing a lot of, extra action to the user that has to decide this and that, then maybe somehow the game will be lost. The users, as you say, they will find some other platforms, and then they will move to them. So what I find interesting in this discussion is whether we can engage the users and create trust, right? And involve them in such a way with the services of the platform, that then when we want to share the data, they will kind of feel comfortable enough that we will do that in a safe way. I'm not bringing Snapchat because obviously it's a very extreme example, but we have been working with other platforms, like, for example, platforms that they provide self-assessment, self-quantification data, like wristbands, right? This kind of solutions, or data that they help the user to improve understanding of physical activities and activities that could be quantified. And what we do see is that, of course, data are important, but what is more important is to keep the user involved with the platform, to keep the user spending time in the platform, not only behavioral wise, but also cognitively, so that the user feels that it's a safe place to be, right? And emotionally, it's a very particular case when it comes to a particular type of services. But what I'm trying to say is that remember that many of these platforms are supposed to provide a pleasure or leisure, let's say, digital activities to the users. And if we start complicating things too much, maybe then we will lose them towards a platform that will find a more practical solution like Snapchat, that the content disappears. So it's not an issue, right? For the users, not that it disappears in reality. But what I'm saying is that we should consider that a little bit. I don't know what is the solution. And I must admit that I'm just provoking a little bit right now on purpose, because I would like to bring that perspective also in the discussion, because I have missed it sometimes
Fantastic.
before.
So, Alex, I turn the provocation to to you, but but it's the question, right? I mean, so rather than taking the decisions, on black and white, or what is black and what is white, right? I mean, the key question here is there scope for building a safe trust data flow in both, ads based, if you want, models, and most of the free services of the platforms, and subscriptions on or pay based services, and what will be the step forwards? I mean, and where the discussion should actually be, rather than saying this is free is bad.
Yes. Well, there is two questions. One is which business model is best, and I think we should leave the market and the user decide. Apart if we think that a business model is notoriously bad, or if we think that with a business model, with a particular business model, the interest of the platform and the user are less aligned than with another business model. But I think overall, I think diversity is in general the best things to do. But then the next question is how we should, because that's clearly an ambition of the Commission and of Breton in particular, how we can develop more data sharing in Europe. And there, clearly, I think with the Digital Governance Act, this is really very, very little. So that is not enough. And I think the fundamental question, the fundamental policy question for encouraging data sharing, if we think that's a good approach, but I think this train has already left now, is do we have to have a kind of a sectoral approach? And you developed in health an approach, in transport another one, in bank another one, or do you want to have a cross-sectoral one? I think that's the first issue. The second issue is, I think how you create. I see three problems why we don't have enough data sharing. No, first, the people don't know or don't understand. So clearly there is a knowledge issue. There is an ability issue, because you have this portability right to some extent, which is limited, but very people use it. And there may be two reasons for that. One is because it's too limited, or the other one is you don't know where to port your data. So the question of ability and the question of incentive. And I think, really the Commission has to solve those two issues. But today, I'm not very convinced. I'm convinced about the objective, but I'm not very convinced about the approach that the Commission has followed so far.
I have a few thoughts. Maybe I can contribute to this.
Sure, but please go ahead.
So I appreciated what was said earlier, that we have to be really thoughtful about data portability. I think it's a great example to look at the portability of, I think likes was the example from earlier. That's really complicated. Like, how exactly do you solve that problem when your behavioral data includes other people's data. That's just very complex. So I do like this idea of more data portability because I resonate with the claim that data is valuable for creating great products. It's great not only for ads, but it's also great for creating great products. And we want to see innovation. So I think what we can do is look at a couple of examples of data portability that work well in the wild. And maybe what we can do is try to learn or extrapolate some generalization out of that. Or maybe what we'll learn is that it's extremely case by case. But one example that we can point at is ad networks. So platforms like Facebook and Google themselves frequently offer ad networks. So I, for 3.5 years, was the tech lead of Facebook's third-party ad network, Audience Network. And there, that our mission was to support other businesses, to support other entrepreneurs who are themselves creating mobile apps that wanted to make their apps either free or discounted by showing ads. And we were intentionally trying to limit barriers to entry, right? If a business has to hire a sales team, contact advertisers, try to get access to ad budgets, build an ad serving stack, that's a lot of work. And that's a significant barrier to entry. So what we tried to do is make it just very easy to just drop in a Facebook SDK and say, hey, Facebook, give me an ad. And it was this sort of in situ thing where the ad request would come and say, here is the device identifier. Show me an ad. And all that behavioral data that Facebook has never leaves Facebook. Facebook simply selects what seems to be a pertinent and relevant ad and returns that. And does a revenue sharing agreement with the majority of the revenue is sent out to the publisher themselves. And that's great in that the person's behavioral data is never leaving the system. And it is reducing the barriers to entry for small app developers. And we've paid out billions of dollars a year to third-party app developers, stimulating competition. One of the things I'm most proud of is that TikTok, who one might consider a competitor of Facebook, was one of the people using Audience Network. And I think that's great. I think it's great that Facebook is actively supporting what could be considered competitors. Another example is your friends on this app. So the Facebook platform allows people to sort of, with consent, choose to connect with apps and choose what data they want to bring along with them. And that's really, really complicated and tricky. And it's not without history of things going wrong. So we need to be super cognizant about privacy when we think about data portability. And I'm sad to say it, you have to think about those who would exploit such systems. So if you were to create an API, there's going to be bad actors who are going to try to do something exploitative. And it may even include consent, like getting people to agree to something they may not understand. But I think a recent example that's pretty cool here is Facebook added a new API to let you find your friends who also use that app. So let's say you connect with an app using the Facebook login, you can find all of your other Facebook friends who also use that app. And this is a very nice consent-driven pattern where you accept this feature. So I think the things I would point out to in data portability here would be, it's very important for us to think about privacy. It's important for us to think about potential for abuse. But also, I think looking forward, privacy-enhancing technologies are the ones I'm most excited about, where this granular data about all this behavioral, like who liked what comment on what post, I just don't think that's that useful. I don't think anyone wants the hassle of dealing with that. I think if you aggregate up the data to make some aggregate anonymous summary, that may actually have the most value and do the best job at protecting people's privacy. But I don't know of a good way to generalize this to all circumstances. So, I represent Facebook in forums like the W3C, where we talk about the future of web advertising and how to make it more private. And so you can see lots of discussion there where Google's put forward proposals like Google Flock, which would do exactly that. It would aggregate information about people's browsing activity around the web, try to distill that to something which doesn't specifically tell you what websites they visited, but release some cohort, and that would be some form of data portability. And they've received a tremendous amount of pushback and lots and lots of criticism. So it's not easy to solve. And I don't think there's a one size fits all solution.
All right, so very much. So Morgan, Do you want to say something?
I just want to
you have the last minute of tension of the audience.
But I would just want to react. Well, I fully agree on what Ben was saying. Data portability is not that clear. It's not that simple. It depends what data you're talking about. It depends what, of course, platform you're talking about. But for us as an association representing small developers, it's true that most of our members do not necessarily monetize their app via ads. However, they do rely very strongly on the safeguard on the user data by platforms, and this, as I mentioned before, to create that consumer trust and therefore the uptake of apps, and this leading to more innovation. So when building business models, there's sometimes this gap between what is required by law in terms of data collection and what's considered good practice. For example, on the GDPR, even if a platform does get consent from users and consumers, users can be tracked in ways they're not comfortable with. And vice versa, you can have practices where you think you're compliant and then in the end you're not at all. So I mean that different ways to go about, either collect, analyze data as little possible in anonymous way possible, or you just get consent for everything and comply with the law, and you never know what that, because you never know that data is going to be useful. So for our members, that large majority is the first option on where to protect privacy, and I think we see more and more business models that tend to lead towards that option. And but we need to leave the diversity of business models out there, and I think the market will also lead to well, with consumer preferences. I think this will kind of, users will choose in the end what business models they want. But I'll finish there because I realize that it's already
yes,
half past.
Yes, thank you very much. So times is up, and you know, we learned a great deal of things today, I believe. Most important is one aspect that we academic, you know, care really a lot, that we know we don't know, that there are many things that, you know, that need to be in fact, I mean, assessed, you know, deeper. And there are some aspects where there is this it might be actually a trade-off, and so this privacy versus the pro-competitive aspect is one of it. So privacy will push actually towards more centralization by the platform, which, you know, might not necessarily be consistent with what some of the approaches that have been followed recently in opening up more, you know, data to their party. And so the discussion should be exactly on how rather than, you know, what. But times is up, and I think that we need to do in a second run to get, you know, into more of this discussion. I really thank you all for the great input that you contributed to the forum. It's been terrific, and thanks, and enjoy the rest of the day and evening.